The aim of this short video is just to give you an update about the documentation and the files and how they may have changed for 2019-2020. So we have made some changes to the files you need to be aware of. We've also introduced an online portfolio called Abiasa, which is a timeline which will record the students' progress over the year. We've thought really hard about student-teacher workload and mentor workload, so we've reduced the number of files just to 2. We've got the teaching file and the planning archive file. So the teaching file is as it was last year, so it would include all of the plans for that week and all of the contextual information about the class and the children's prior learning. It will also include some personal details about the student, how they've done on their subject knowledge audits. But something that we have changed is we've moved the trackers into the teaching file. And just a reminder about those trackers, there are 3 of them. First one is the CPD tracker, and in there the student teacher should log how they've used their 10% CPD time. Do remember that CPD time should be informed by the student teacher's targets, and this will allow them to really reflect on their targets and hopefully make the progress that's needed. The TS5 tracker is for the student teacher to log their experience of supporting children in relation to TS5. So that's about differentiation and supporting pupils with SEND, how have our student teachers supported children who have English as an additional language, and also how they may have challenged the more able pupil. The final tracker is a curriculum tracker, and in that document the student teacher needs to log what subjects they've observed being taught, what subjects they've actually taught themselves, and which subjects they've been appraised in. And that's to ensure they have a really broad experience during their year with us. Do remember that it's the student teacher's responsibility to complete these trackers, and these need keeping up to date on a regular basis. The planning archive file is very much like it was last year, so once the lesson plans have been appraised, they can move back into the planning archive file, and in that file there should be contextual information about the school as well. I think it's really important, especially now that we've moved to 2 files, that these files are kept up to date and are accurate. I think it's now much more manageable with them just being 2 files. Remember, the files should be in school at all times, so they need to be regularly checked by the mentor. Just a reminder about the placement handbook. In that handbook you can find the percentage of teaching, you can find expectations for the student teacher and expectations for the mentor as well. And you'll also find those key dates of when the interim reports are due and when the summative reports are due. Just a reminder about teaching commitment, because it does slowly move up to 50%. That is 50% of the week, so 50% of the timetable. So 50% equates to 2.5 days. So even if the student teacher is away from school for a day, they still need to be teaching 2.5 days because they need the experience. So that's why it's there. Just a little bit about how things might have changed. So there is still the weekly appraisal. So the mentor will appraise the student once a week in a formal observation. This will be recorded now on an online document on Abiasa, so it's not a paper appraisal document anymore. It's on Abiasa, and I'll show you that in a second. Same with the weekly progression meeting. This is really important, this weekly meeting, because this is where we look at the whole week rather than just the appraised lesson. And this document will also be filled in on Abiasa. Please remember, when you are setting your targets after the weekly progression meeting, that we look at the whole week of the student in school, and we just don't base those targets on that one observed lesson. Also, at this weekly progression meeting, the student teacher should be bringing evidence of how they've worked towards last week's targets, because this will demonstrate they've been really proactive and they're making the progress that's needed. So a little bit about Abiasa Pro, to give it its real name. It's an online portfolio. It will produce a timeline for each student, and on that timeline everybody will have access to records of their appraisal lessons and also their weekly progression meetings, as well as interim reports and also interim reports and summative reports. You will be sent a login and a password from our placement team, together with a link of where to log on to Abiasa Pro. Please follow that link, add your username, and then add the password that's been given to you. Once you have logged on, you will have access to your students' records then, and they look like this. So you will see a timeline, and on that timeline certain boxes will appear. You will see a box for a weekly progression meeting here, and you'll see a box for a lesson appraisal here. I've created a demo timeline just to show you what it looks like. Now it's your student teacher's responsibility to add the templates to these boxes. So if this is the first week and we're doing our first lesson appraisal, we will add now, and that will automatically add the template to that box. So it's very easy to do. Save the date and continue. The student teacher will add the focus and the subject for that appraisal. They will add what the targets were for last week, and then the lesson will start. Now part 1 is a section to be filled in by the mentor during the appraised lesson, and you will log the time. So let's say it was 10:30, and then we will log an observation in terms of what was happening in the classroom at that time. Once the lesson is completed, we will move to part 2, and this is the post-appraisal discussion. So here we will have the reflective discussion between the mentor and the student recorded here. Once that has been completed, targets will be set relating to the observed lesson and any strategies that will help the student logged there. Both the student and the mentor will then sign it as being an accurate record, and then we will submit this document to the timeline. So when you have completed the document, it's really important that we click to complete, and then we submit the document and save it. So we can go back to the timeline, and then we can look at this weekly progression meeting, and this is very much the same. This document's already been added to the timeline, so we can view it and we can work through each section as we go, and this is just a record of your weekly meeting and your discussion here. So targets will be set again with certain strategies, any concerns and placements from the placement. We can sign it off as being accurate, and then we can submit it, remembering to click to complete, and that should be done. A little word about some of these tabs which will be useful for you. First one being the document tab, and here you've got all the documentation that you might need for that placement, including the additional support procedures handbook, where you'll find the action plan if that is needed. The other tab that's really useful is the Standards tab, and this will replace the NASBIT guidance that used to be in the student profile. And here, periodically throughout the placement, the student, teacher and the mentor can sit down and they can go through each of the standards, and they can start to highlight where at that particular point in time the student teacher might be, and we can highlight some of those colours, so it's useful. Something that you need to know is that our placement team have produced a really handy mentor's guide to Abiasa, so you need to make sure that you have a copy of that as well. That will be emailed out to you with your username and your password. Abiasa is very, very easy to use. It's very simple to use. And we're moving away from gathering all of this hard evidence towards the teacher standards. But what that means is that the evidence will be coming from the timeline rather than from the files of evidence that we had. So it's really important that we're quite tight with how we log this information, and that we're really clear when we do make lesson observations and in our weekly progression meetings, that we start linking the evidence there towards the teacher's standards. Anyway, I hope you found this little video useful. Please remember to read the Mentor's Guide for Abiasa. Please contact the placement team if there are any issues. There are bound to be technical issues to begin with. It's a new system until we all get to grips with it, but I'm sure it's going to be a lot easier than it was in the past. So thank you for listening. I hope it's been useful. Bye.